Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome. My name is Jennifer Bible, and I am one of the facilitators for today's IA Virtual Symposium. This is the second of 4 sessions that is being hosted by the individual assistants here at FEMA. We look forward to engaging with you on current and future issues about how FEMA can collaborate with you, our partners, to grow in our shared understanding and in our capability to respond and recover from disasters. And I'd like to turn it over to Emily for some logistical announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, my name is Emily Rogers, and I will be assisting Jennifer in facilitating this symposium. Before we begin, I would like to share some information to help make for a smoother symposium experience. And please forgive my reading, but there are numerous details and I want to make sure I get it right. This symposium is being interpreted into American Sign Language and will be captioned in English. Therefore, you will see an interpreter on the screen with the symposium speaker or presenter. If you would like to view closed captioning, it is available live at the link shown on the screen. Our staff has also put this link into the chat for everyone to access. As a result of the interpretation and captioning, please expect the speakers to pause during their remarks, presentation, and the transitions between speakers to allow our interpreters and captioners adequate time to rotate during the symposium. To ensure all features of today's symposium are accessible, we recommend using a laptop. Participants will be muted and will have video disabled. We will not be able to unmute any participants during this webinar. Please use the questions box to submit additional questions for the facilitated question and answer portion of the webinar. If you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please send a message in the questions box, and one of our technical support specialists will work with you directly to help troubleshoot the problem. You can also email webcastinfo@cadmusgroup.com for assistance. Our staff will put this email in the chat now. This webinar will be recorded and posted online at a later date. The link to this recording will be sent to all registrants once it is posted. Throughout the symposium, we welcome your questions and comments. Please use the questions box to ask questions of our presenters. Questions that are not answered during today's symposium will be answered after the webinar and sent out to all registrants at a later date. If you'd prefer to communicate with FEMA's Individual Assistance Division outside of the question and answer box, we invite you to email us directly. Our staff will drop our email address in the chat now. Our email address will also be posted numerous times throughout the symposium for your use and reference. Today's agenda, presentation, and other materials are available to download in the Handouts tab of your GoToWebinar panel. To view the materials, please select the link and download the material. I'd now like to turn it back over to Jennifer to get us started.
Thanks, Emily. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Melissa Forbes, the Assistant Administrator for Recovery, who will be gracing us with opening remarks. Dr. Forbes.
Great. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're located. Jennifer, thanks so much for the warm introduction and for getting us kicked off here. So I mainly just wanted to come and welcome folks and say how happy that I am that you're here. You were really in for, I think, an incredibly useful and relevant conversation today. As many of you know, the FEMA strategic plan has 3 focus areas, which is equity, climate change, and readiness. And I think your first session today is going to really be focused on readiness around being ready for an IA disaster declaration. And what do you do if you don't have IA declarations very often? How do you stay in that readiness posture and make sure you're prepared when that happens? So I looked at the list of distinguished speakers, and I think you guys are in for a really good dialogue. The second topic I believe that you're going to be talking about today is direct housing reimagined. That should be led by Tracy Brasher, one of our regional recovery division directors out of Region 6 in Denton, Texas. And I'm really excited. This is a administrator priority for the agency to really take a hard look at our direct housing program. And that I would include our sheltering as well, because I think sometimes you have to look at both together and honestly, even with disaster case management as well, to really get the full sense of where we can find ways to expedite the process of getting survivors into temporary housing, but also what are some of the best practices or pitfalls that you all have experienced during your emergency management careers, whether it's working for a state or for FEMA or even being in a community that was hit by a disaster. The goal with that project is to come up with some short-term ideas of how we can try to make things run smoothly for hurricane season. But we're also interested in having a broader philosophical discussion about, what is the best way to handle housing needs of disaster survivors following an event. And that's not just a FEMA question. So here in DC, we're having a lot of conversations with our recovery support function, other federal agency partners. And this is really a large priority for the White House as well. So please be candid, please be frank in that conversation. And if you don't have as much familiarity of really helpful information from your peers across the board. The other thing I would just mention is that equity is really a sort of a passion project of mine. And as we go into this hurricane season, we are looking to continue to find new ways to operationalize equity in the field and find ways to be making sure that we're serving all survivors, and especially those from underserved or historically underrepresented groups in our, not just in our response, but also in our long-term recovery planning. So lots of exciting work happening. I just am thrilled that so many of you could join us today. Please enjoy the robust conversation, and I hope that at some point we will be able to have an in-person IA symposium where I can meet many more of you face-to-face. So with that, I will turn it back over to Emily to introduce our next speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes. We really appreciate your opening remarks. I am now pleased to introduce the following presenters to provide you information on what to expect when expecting an IA disaster declaration, lessons learned from states with 10 years between IA declarations. Our speakers will include Becky Simzik, Individual Assistance Branch Chief for Region 1, Lisa Castaldo, Long-Term Recovery Section Chief, Individual Assistance Officer, Alabama Emergency Management Agency, Ken Dumas, State Hazard Mitigation Officer, State IA Officer, Connecticut Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, Jim Garrett, Individual Assistance Officer, Commonwealth of Kentucky, and John Donahue, Emergency Management Program Specialist for Region 3. Becky, over to you. Becky, we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, let's try this again. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me now. Thanks for joining this afternoon. Thanks for letting our group present to you. We're going to go through this pretty fast because we only have 30 minutes, but I want to provide a little background on today's topic before I get into our first slide here. So when Hurricane Ida hit the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, there were several states that had IA declarations for the first time in 8-9 years, not quite 10 years, or almost 10 years. I was deployed first to Pennsylvania, then Connecticut, And a lot of the Region 1 IA staff was deployed to New York and New Jersey. And then they joined me in Connecticut when we got that declaration. During those deployments, we noticed a similar amount, a number of similar challenges on both the FEMA side and the state side between those 3 states that we deployed to. And much of that was due to the length of time between the last IA declaration in those states. So when FEMA headquarters asked for topics for the symposium, I suggested that we had a session that talks about what the states need to be prepared for when they have an IA declaration pending. And I sent an email to Jennifer Bible and company, and it was a very casual, what I propose we talk about is sort of what to expect when you're expecting a disaster, an IA deck. And I never thought that would be the actual title, but I do think it's apropos. So I hope you can laugh and smile a little bit at our title. And without further ado, I give you what to expect when you're expecting an IA declaration. I'm first, so I'm going to go over this slide. But one housekeeping detail I do want to talk about first. There's 5 of us that are going to speak right now. So again, we're going to go pretty fast. And there are some slides in the slide deck, slides 16 to 19, that we are most likely not going to have time to present. But I hope you'll read them after the session of the symposium is done. And I hope you'll use them as starting points for conversations between FEMA regional offices and states who really don't have IA declarations very often, or perhaps you have a new IA officer and the staff at the state or the region hasn't done this before. So it's by no means an exhaustive list, it's just starting points for some of the things to think about. So when we look at this slide, these are the most important takeaways from Region 1 that we learned specifically in Connecticut, but also again, I was deployed to other disasters and my staff was deployed to other disasters, and we had some similarities. So if you have any takeaways from this session, from me personally, this is the takeaway I would want you to have. One is stay current on FEMA policies. They change, and they're probably not going to be the same as they were a year ago. They are almost certainly not going to be the same as they were 5 or 10 years ago. Things are different, things evolve. Our statutes and regulations change and mandate that we do things differently or do new things. So I think it's really important for the states to stay up on these and ask your regions, if you haven't heard anything, if any new policies have come out, what do you need to be aware of? And regions, we need to be really diligent about sending these things out to our states and sharing with our state partners. It needs to be a two-way conversation so that you don't have any expectations when an IA declaration is coming to your state that things will be the way it was during Hurricane Sandy or Hurricane Irene or whatever disaster was 10 or 12 years ago. And just because we did something that way in one disaster doesn't mean it's the way we're implementing it now. So please be aware of that, because it's not going to be the same. And that leads me to the next point, which is because things are different, we have multiple components in IA. There are a lot of different things that we have to do at the same time. And that gets very overwhelming. It's overwhelming for FEMA. We know it's overwhelming for the states and for the tribes, but we want to work with you and we want you to really be able to understand and break it down into as manageable bites as we can reasonably do when we're in an active disaster. So all of the different components of IA have different timelines. There are things we're going to talk to you about that need to be done in the first 24, 48, or 72 hours of the disaster. There are things that need to be done in the first 14 or 15 days. There are things that will have to be done in the first 30 days. So we're going to ask the state for many things simultaneously. And if you are the solo IA officer in your state, it's really important that you understand what these requirements are. So FEMA will continually walk you through what the timelines are, what the requirements are, whatever process there is. We can do a lot of that steady state and get you ready. And then in that time between completing the PDA and submitting the IA declaration and waiting for the IA declaration to be signed off and approved, there's a bunch of things we could do to start thinking about when it's implemented, we can just hit the ground running. So there'll be a lot of back and forth, a lot of things that seem overwhelming, but we want you to be ready as possible for this. So between staying current on policy changes and understanding the multiple components and the timelines for the IA components, you'll be in really good shape to start up a disaster at the very least. That is all I have to say. I know we're going to take questions at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. Lisa, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Am I good? Okay. At Alabama EMA, IA is a part of the recovery division. The individual assistance program is one full-time staff person, and that's me. Historically, we tend to have a few years between events, but lately we've had overlapping events. Between 2010 and 19, we had 6 declared events with IA, but in the last 2 years, we've had 5. So also several SBA only events and numerous non-declared events. So we do stay busy. Next slide, please. The part of the process that I feel is really challenging, I thought would be good to discuss today, is the importance of the preliminary damage assessment process, the PDA process. In Alabama, we have a 3-step process. First, the county does an initial assessment. Second, we do state local validations. And then third, if it's warranted, the state requests joint state federal damage assessments. Some of the specific challenges that we encounter in Alabama with this is coordination of PDAs with counties. They're often still in response mode, not yet fully into recovery. In Alabama, we have 2 distinct tornado seasons and a long hurricane season. So it's very common to have weather events happening very close together. This means it's really important to keep damages that are often in the same geographic area but have different incident periods separated. And this happens a lot, especially in the spring here. Another challenge is a lot of attrition at the county and state level, creating situations where there's very little institutional knowledge. And some of the things we've learned to try and combat these challenges are we've identified and use a single web-based tool system to record and capture damages, to encourage counties to utilize the system and build consistency in the quality of the PDA. We provide the system at no cost to our 67 counties and our 1 federally recognized tribe. We train on this regularly in any venue that we can have a captured audience. We'll go to them. This includes online, our division meetings, and state conferences. We've also developed a standard operating procedures to clearly lay out the process for conducting PDAs. We've learned to open a corresponding event with the PDA system every time an event is created in WebEOC. We also send a standard email to the counties that includes deadlines and the FEMA PDA guide for their reference, easy reference. Alabama has a lot of events, but not a large staff, so we cross-train EMA staff from all areas of the agency to lead PDA teams. Next slide, please. The next thing I wanted to mention in relation to that is keeping your relationships current with your state partners. For Alabama IA, the Mass Care Coordinator, State Voluntary Agency Liaison, and the Disaster Case Management Program Lead are key partners. I know they're on today listening. We also have a standing Functional and Access Needs and Disaster Task Force, and we work closely with them during blue skies. The next thing on the slide, I'd put asterisks beside the State-Led Housing Task Force. It's something we are continuously working to improve. We have a standing list, but the task force is not very active between disasters. This group could be much better utilized to prepare for potential housing missions, and something we are working on. But some of the lessons learned about building and sustaining of those relationships during blue skies, we invite the Mass Care Coordinator and State Val to the monthly IA Partners Call, other relevant meetings and calls. I maintain an email group for our state IA partners for consistent communication. I keep this group informed as soon as we have an event that requires PDAs. I let them know when they're being conducted, if a declaration request is being submitted by the governor, and when a DEC is granted. I don't ever want them caught off guard as our partners. I also forward all external affairs messaging to them to share with their networks. Many of the partners have county level offices, and they can share information very easily with survivors. Next slide, please. And finally, I wanted to briefly discuss the importance of the state FEMA coordination, specifically immediately following the declaration. The assignment of the FEMA IA branch director for the disaster is quick, and I always request a call immediately to discuss our coordination plan. A few of the key items we discussed very early on are the operations to date. I make sure I give good background and current status of the event. This might include shelters, VOAD involvement, fatalities, any other important item the FEMA IABD would need to be aware of. Next are the expectations of the state. Alabama is very involved in our disasters, and while we can't match person to person with FEMA, we do have state leads for all the programs, and these program leads coordinate closely with their FEMA counterpart for meetings, calls, and field operations. Also confirm that your state owner agreement's up to date and doesn't need to be amended for the event. I work with the IABD also to prepare questions for the housing inspector briefing, because all these things are happening quickly, and begin confirmation of DRC locations. In Alabama, we established joint operations with FEMA, and we do move to the JFO. So if that's going to be how your state would operate, then start to make plans to maybe be working off-site for an indefinite period of time. These are just a few recommendations I can offer and hopefully make your next IA event a little easier. And I want to thank everyone for your time and attention today.
Thank you, Lisa. That was wonderful. Let's move on to Ken Dumas from Connecticut.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Dumas. I am the State Hazard Mitigation Officer here in Connecticut, and I also am the State IA Officer. And I'm just going to briefly run through a few things in my notes today, just to build on what Becky spoke about at the beginning and what Lisa kindly offered in her presentation. By the way, both of you, fantastic job, and it's a joy working with you, Becky. I appreciate you having us on today. So just to give you a little background on the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut does not have a county level government system. We have 169 towns and 2 tribal nations. DEMIS, or the Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security here in Connecticut, runs on what we standardly call is a regional type of staffing. So each of our 5 regions in the state have a regional coordinator who leads the emergency management state level lead rather for each of those regions. DEMIS, or Connecticut DEMIS, has a relatively small staff. Myself, clearly you can see I wear a couple hats, just 2 here that I've shown. But I also am involved in the ESF6 lead in response. I lead the ESF6 mass care coordination, and I also lead the ESF6 working group, which is a blue sky group that meets on a monthly basis. Again, one of the key points here is, as an emergency management organization, a state emergency management organization, we are all wearing multiple hats. And sometimes I joke with my colleagues that, you know, we have the capability of probably doing about 70% of our job well, just based on the structure of the organization. And again, you know, this structure, as overwhelming as it can be, allows us to be involved in many areas. So one of those areas that I mentioned before was the emergency support function 6, and that closely partners with our VOAD group. What that has done over the course of the last 10 years that I've been involved here in the state of Connecticut is we have a very robust partnership with our VOAD partners, our state partners, our federal partners, and the like. We have, when we're not in response mode, we have quarterly meetings to just touch base with everyone, learn new things that everyone is doing. Again, the point to this is always keep a dialogue open with all of your partners, both the local, state, federal, and VOAD partners. And I would say this, that given the level of staffing that we have here, make those requests for additional assistance if necessary up front when we hear about an upcoming disaster. I'm just going to take a minute here to talk about our actual IDA declaration, if that's all right, Becky. Are you good with that? Yeah, okay, great.
Yes, go ahead.
So as Becky mentioned earlier, we had the remnants of the storm Ida come up here on the East Coast. The storm happened. We put out inquiries from our regional coordinators for responses to what kind of damages we were seeing. Initially, we didn't see a lot of reporting coming out of those regions for the damage assessments. Over the course of the next couple months, the requests for assistance started coming in, and we clearly saw an additional need for assistance from flooding events in most of our coastal regions. We again reached out to our Region 1 IA contacts to begin the IDA, IA, PA, PDA process. We started this process here at the state level, building an IA GIS dashboard with our Geographic Information System staff of one, by the way. She did a fantastic job compiling the data, developing the GIS mapping, using the social vulnerability index data to map out the low-lying areas and properties in those low-lying floodplain areas. We then use that data to reach out again to our IA partners at the federal level, and in partnership we decided to collect that data and then use that data to do a virtual PDA to get some initial assessments up and underway. After about a week of the virtual PDAs, we quickly realized that it was going to be important to put some boots on the ground. Again, with our partners at the state, local, federal levels, including FEMA and SBA, we put multiple teams together to go out and start assessing boots on the ground areas. After about 2 weeks of door-to-door knocking and looking around and assessments, we compiled enough data to do a disaster declaration request for 2 full counties, and we followed that up 2 weeks later to request an additional 3rd county in the state of Connecticut. That's all I have today. Thank you, Becky, for having me on. I hope I was able to contribute well to the discussion.
Yes, thank you, Ken. Jim, it's all yours. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Becky, and great to see everyone this afternoon. Of course, we're building on lots of different things that you're hearing from other IA officers, and of course what Becky had to present. So I'd like to present 3 other areas as we think about preparing for the disasters. And quite honestly, in Kentucky, well, we may sometimes get a couple of years in between IA declared disasters. We have some sort of disaster every single year. And so when we're talking about the PDAs, keep in mind that there's a lot of times you may be doing PDAs and need to be prepared how to do that. And it may not result in a declaration, but we are always very active in doing that preliminary damage assessment work and joint PDA. So be prepared for that. But the 3 areas I'd like to touch upon to add to the conversations and preparedness that we can do as IA officers and VALs and mitigation officers and all the other duties and hats that we have are, I'd like to speak about forms and some paperwork with our FEMA staff, relationships with other state agencies, and then Emac, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, and how that can come into play both to be supportive and for ourselves and supportive to other states. So first I wanted to say something about forms and FEMA staff, especially with Becky saying that there's a lot of things that have to be done immediately after that declaration, all within a matter of hours and days and sometimes like that. But for all of us in the States, if you've not had the experience, is that you will find that for every one of those duties and job responsibilities, FEMA will bring in additional staff and staff and staff and staff. And so for every one of us, there's sometimes 200 or 300 FEMA staff working on things if it's a big disaster and they deploy. I share that just because that's a tremendous resource, But also, we have to keep our wits about us as IA officers and have that unique and special relationship with our regional IA staff. So prior to any declaration, I would always recommend to be in good relationship and know who your regional IA staff are. You know, and I know we all meet on those regular quarterly meetings, sometimes monthly meetings, but make sure we participate as much as possible because we're building relationships. And as part of that relationship building is to try to understand from your FEMA regional colleagues how many of them would be deployed to your state. So you see those familiar faces and voices so that when all the things are coming at us and the things that are needing to be done, and there's is sometimes a sense of urgency, well, there is a sense of urgency to that, is that again, you can have that clear conversation with your colleagues that you've already established relationship with to say, how important do I have X number of hours, or I need your support. I need you to clarify this for me so that we can just stay steady and be moving on, but that comes through relationships. But one of the other things that will soon happen, you know, even as soon as the day or 2 days after a declaration, is that we'll start getting daily reports, whether it's registration numbers, housing numbers, those kinds of things. I would encourage everyone, especially if it's been some time between disasters, that you ask to see copies of those kinds of reports from other states, sit down and look at them, see if they make sense to you, and what doesn't make sense, then work with your FEMA colleagues in advance and say, tell me what all this means. What are these numbers? What are these averages? What are these acronyms? So, you know, there you get some reports, you know, for example, the daily registration reports, you can see your county breakdowns and how many people are registering. That's pretty clear. But then they'll start housing assistance and IHP and ONA and all those other acronyms. So I would encourage us as state colleagues to work with our FEMA colleagues, build those relationships, but ask about all the forms. You know, what forms should I expect to see following a declaration, and then spend time trying to understand those forms, because ultimately it becomes our responsibility for our own leadership to explain what those numbers mean and what they're about and how we make decisions based on those things. So that's forms and FEMA relationships. Now let me spend a moment with other state agencies. I often say, and some of my colleagues hear me say this a lot, is that our role in individual assistance and all that's encompassed in the IA programs and falls under that is where emergency management meets the social services. And there are two worlds that oftentimes don't meet together, social services and disaster or emergency management. So we have a role, I think, of bringing those together because we're serving people and households and restoring lives and homes and hope. And we need the social services. So I would encourage us as much as possible to work in partnership with state agencies to welcome them into the emergency management world, to say that after a disaster, declared or not, that we will need their assistance. What particular things should they play, and make sure that we have kind of the agreements in place, even within our state and state agencies, that people will see they have a responsibility to help out in times of disaster, that it's not all emergency management, that we need our social service partners. One of those really important areas that we've touched upon, and we'll touch upon some more, I think in this webinar, is housing. You know, we'll talk about the direct housing programs and our own state housing programs. Lisa mentioned how we should work with a disaster task force, housing task force, and indeed that's the case. But I would provide strong encouragement to anyone to reach out to your state housing folks to understand housing needs on a day-to-day basis. We say that all the time in counties. Sometimes that people really don't understand housing, affordable housing, the need for housing, how housing works, who owns the housing in local communities, and the same thing with states. And I think it would behoove us to really try to understand housing on a regular basis, and those housing partners, whether federal, state agencies, and the nonprofit agencies working in housing all the time to better understand housing. And along with that, all of our other state social service programs and providers. And I would even add education, because of course, after disasters, we look at what is the impact on schools, on our school families, on our school children. So as much as we can build those relationships prior to the disaster, will be a tremendous help to us afterwards. And now that we have very large disasters we're dealing with in Kentucky, I'm finding that the real godsend for me has been not only FEMA colleagues, but my state partners who get it. Other state agencies outside of emergency management said, yeah, this impacts us in our work as well. How do we work together in meeting needs of people? And finally, I'd like to say a word about the Emac, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, because we do hear a lot about Emac and that sharing of resources. This is a state and territorial-led program where states are mutually supportive to one another and sharing resources at times of disaster. And with the idea that we can complement, supplement, and fulfill gaps that we may have in our state delivery of services, with the idea that when we put out Emac requests, the persons will respond that can come and do the work that needs to be done. Oftentimes I hear Emac used as a great way to train, and it's not necessarily training. So we want to be careful about that. You know, that I've heard it said that some places like to hire new staff and get them sent off on an Emac so they can go learn. Well, that's a disappointment to the receiving state in some ways, because we need help and we need people to keep us moving forward. And it's not to say that you have to have experience, direct experience in a disaster, but you need to have knowledge and you need to apply that knowledge. And so I guess with Emac, it's not a place to come and learn for the first time, but it's really the place to come and apply the knowledge that we have. And we can do some learning and gaining an experience, but it's got to be based on that. And that's all to say that for IA partners, if it's a while between disasters, if you have some experience in IA work, at least know the language, know the knowledge, have the relationships, you could be helpful. When we send out Emac requests, that comes almost like a mission assignment. This is what we need to have done. And if you can do that work, come on, you know, it'll be a great help and you can build on experience. And always have that conversation with the person requesting, if you can, to say, am I right for this position? So Emac is something we should look at, could look at, need to look at as a way to provide assistance to our colleagues any place in the country that may need support. But it is a good spot to build upon our experience that we have as IA officers in a good way. And I know for me, it's been extremely helpful when I've Emac'd to other states, then to bring that experience back to Kentucky to say, how do we learn and how do we do better? But through all these opportunities that we've talked about today, we have that ability to build on experience, even in that distance between disasters, that time distance between disasters. We have to be as proactive as we can to be prepared for our own state.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, we're going to have our last presenter, John Donahue from FEMA Region 3. John?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Very good.
We can hear you.
So my section is going to talk a little bit about the operations from the regional perspective. We had some really good insights from our state counterparts. If we go to the next slide. So I'm going to start off with start preparations and discuss everything pre-event. You'll hear a lot of similarities from what I talk about today than you've already heard from some of our other speakers. And hopefully that will reinforce some of the important things that we go through. We do a lot of prep before an event happens in our region. We have quarterly meetings with some of our ESF 6 staff, or Emergency Support Function 6 folks, and our IA counterparts. We communicate quite a bit with a lot of our regions, or a lot of our other states. We have, in some of our states, we have a FEMA integration team. It's a FIT team that they call it. And they have a lot of individual staff that will focus on that particular state. So they do lot of pre-planning. They do a lot of discussions, a lot of scenarios with different things. We don't have an IA presence in all of our states, but some of you may also have a fit team in yours, and we try to take advantage of that. We also do a lot of trainings. We do individual trainings to some of our states, going out and talk about PDAs or talk about what an IA disaster is, and more importantly, what an IA disaster isn't, and give some of the people an idea of what to expect before they have a disaster, so they can ask those good questions. We're fortunate to have a Readiness Day set aside every month, and we have different things that the whole region shuts down for that day, and we talk about readiness, and we have some scenarios for that. So that's a pretty good way that we try to prepare ourselves, and it oftentimes incorporates our state partners, and we include them into our preparations. And coming up, since we're a coastal states, we have a bunch of those. We have a hurricane prep that we usually do every year. It's coming up usually in May, and then we'll talk to all of our states about, you know, what's coming up, some new things that are going on in some of the different areas, and IA is usually one of those. So we try to do all that as some of the prep that we have. So next is assist states with technical assistance. So, you know, a lot of the states may have not done this before. That's kind of why we're here today. So they need help with technical assistance, reviewing some of the information that they have. They may need help on the declaration part, trying to fill everything out and cross all the T's and dot all the I's. And, you know, we can kind of guide them, you know, how they need to do that, and give them some examples or some answers to some questions that they have. We usually dust off all of our standard operating procedures. We try to update those every couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and try to add some of the new things that come in. So that's usually important for us. The initial damage assessments and joint damage assessments. So with COVID, it introduced some challenges with us with how we're going to do everything virtually. That had to be built, and, you know, then go back to in person. So how is that going to look? How do the states do their IDAs, their initial damage assessments? And, you know, how does that process integrate once we do a joint damage assessment, and how we do that? So then we move over to the preliminary damage assessments. We do a pretty good overview for all of our states. And we actually just created a video. What we usually do with the video is at the beginning of the season, usually June 1st, we'll send the video and a lot of the other documents out. And, you know, it's a good refresher. They can email it around. And if they do have a disaster, that's just an easy way to get a quick refresher if they're going to do a PDA. And I think we did put the link in there. So, you know, it's that actual webinar is about 15 minutes worth of IA and 15 minutes worth of PA. So next one, send updated preliminary damage assessment guides. Now the individual assistance program and policy guide, the IAPPG, is really good for us. It gives the states a really good idea if they're not understanding some of all the technical terms that we have, and we love to have technical terms and acronyms. So it explains a lot of those. We make sure that we give out all the documents, and again, usually beginning of the season, and if we do have a disaster, we'll send those again as a refresher. I talked a little bit about the declaration request. Any assistance that they would need with that, we usually try to help there. And disaster recovery pre-identification. So some of the centers, you know, we tried to get an idea of which areas need the DRCs. Is it one in every county? Is it multiples in counties? Is it a fixed site? Is it a mobile DRC? What do the states, what do the counties need? So that's a lot of discussion that we have beforehand, so we can try to pre-identify those. Next slide. Again, it was mentioned before, you know who your state individual assistance officer is. A lot of times, you know, if we haven't had a disaster in 10 years, we've gone through many individual assistance officers on the state side, or, you know, they don't have any experience with being Emac'd anywhere else. So we have to work with them on that and try to help each other out and at least know who to contact and who our counterpart is. Some of the requested programs, we usually get the individuals and households program. automatically when we get a disaster, but you have to ask for any of the additional programs, some of the community services programs, disaster unemployment, disaster legal services, disaster case management, things like that. So try to help them with that. Requesting some of the additional programs once we do have a disaster. If you have an event that has a lot of housing needs, you may want to implement transitional sheltering assistance. What is transitional sheltering assistance? Critical needs. You know, a lot of times we can say, hey, you may want to think about doing this. Or you can go back to the IPPG and say, hey, you know, you can look up some of these things. This is what we're going to try to help you with. You should be thinking about these things. Other needs assistance. If you haven't done in a disaster in over 10 years, the system has completely changed. We're now using pay.gov, and the states have to sign up for that. So it takes a little bit of time to do it. It's not difficult, but you know, you need to go through that process. It's good to do that in blue skies while you can still have some time to identify who the people are going to be, the contact points, etc. Ending the registration period, what does that look like? How do you end the registration period? Is it the 60 days good enough? Do we need another 30 days? Do we need another 60 days? You know, what is that looking like, and how do we go about doing that? And that's a good conversation with our counterparts. And then lastly would be closeout. You know, are you talking to your grants folks on how to close things out, what needs to be closed out, the timeframes for that, and you know, you'd have those discussions early and know who to talk to on your states, on the state counterpart side. And really, that is it for me. So I appreciate your time.
All right, that mute button's a little tricky. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Thank you to all of our panelists. I do want to mention we have slides 16 through 19 that we are not going to be able to talk about right now. And the last thing I want to mention before I turn it back over is there is in the handout section for the participants and the panelists a resource guide we put together in Region 1. It is, again, by no means exhaustive. It's just a starting point, but it is has a bunch of has different links to different websites and different information that you can utilize when looking at the various topics as outlined on the resource guide. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope this was helpful, and I'll turn it back over to you, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky, Lisa, Ken, Jim, and John. As a reminder, if you have any questions, you can submit them in the questions box, and we would be happy to answer them. Additionally, if you would prefer to communicate with FEMA's Individual Assistance Division outside of the questions box, we invite you to email us directly. Our staff will drop the email in the chat now. As of right now, we have not received any questions, so we will move on to our next topic. I would now like to introduce Tracy Brasher, who will conduct a Direct Housing Reimagined listening session. Tracy, you have the floor.
All right, thanks so much. Again, my name is Tracy Brasher. I'm the Recovery Division Director for FEMA Region 6. What I'm doing today is really introducing the Reimagined Direct Housing Initiative that FEMA is conducting. If we could go to the next slide. And so as a part of, I think what Melissa said in the beginning was talking a little bit about our agency strategic plan and our annual planning guidance. And in that, equity was certainly a focus for FEMA, with our goal of instilling equity as a foundation of emergency management. And then as part of that goal, our objective of delivering assistance through a people-first approach. Based on that, the Office of Response and Recovery has been directed to partner with the regions to develop recommendations on how the Individual Assistance Direct Housing Program can be reimagined to meet survivor needs more effectively and consistently. Some of the activities that will incur in the first year of implementation will include engaging with survivors, state, local, tribal, territorial, and other external partners leveraging some of what we've already learned through our continuous improvement and after action analysis, developing performance metrics to enable program evaluation, and creating advanced planning capabilities. Next slide. And so over the years, FEMA's approach to post-disaster temporary housing has evolved based on successes, based on challenges from previous direct housing missions, and concerted efforts to re-envision direct housing without some of the hurdles of existing laws, regulations, and policy. This specific effort that I am leading is conducting that stakeholder engagement to gather feedback, to develop short, mid, and long-term recommendations based on the findings and analysis to include other lines of effort, which you see on this slide, which are conducting the survivor feedback, assessing business processes and operational roles, enhancing housing missions to support and performance, identifying data management improvements for new direct housing technology system, something that has been identified over and over again over the years. And I think we are finally going to be able to fund a new housing technology system. And then messaging, developing a toolkit for messaging around housing, one on current missions so that we're not developing messages and products in every single disaster, but then messaging around what it is we are doing, what this initiative is, and what the long-term goal is to be able to make policy changes and legislative proposals to really reimagine housing. Next slide. And so as part of this stakeholder engagement, we have developed an engagement approach, building understanding and support, not only across FEMA, but with our external partners. And so as part of that, you can see on this slide some of the things that we have already accomplished. And now what we are doing is sharing this approach with regions, other FEMA organizations, external partners, in order to begin that outreach and engagement assessment of direct housing through stakeholder engagement, whether it be listening sessions, focus groups, surveys, etc. We recently did a small kind of focus group listening session with NEMA, and we are planning to do another listening session next week at the NEMA mid-year as well. All of this will work to develop the plan for change, whether it be short-term for next hurricane season, mid-term, or long-term for some really, hopefully, big changes to how we reimagine direct housing. And so, next slide. So in the near future, we want to hear from you. And so upcoming listening sessions will be scheduled soon. But I wanted you to know that we are doing the NEMA mid-year session next week. So if your state director is participating in that, it would be great to get with them if you're going to NEMA to be involved in that, to get some initial feedback from our states on the direct housing as it is now, and direct housing on how we can reimagine it for the future. That initial listening session was certainly very valuable. We got some really great input in just an hour session. And so we would like to do the same with our state IA partners and have a listening session in the near future and get your input as well. So we will likely be coming out with potentially questions in advance or a survey, and then we will be scheduling a listening session to hear from you. So that is all I have for a quick briefing and overview of what the FEMA Direct Housing Reimagine effort is, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any in the chat. Thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to talking with you in an upcoming listening session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please submit them in the question box. If you would prefer to communicate with FEMA's Individual Assistance Division outside of the question box, you can email us directly at the email in the chat. I'll now turn it over to Jennifer to lead our question and answer session.
Thanks very much, Emily. And Tracy, we do have one question that came in the chat. The participant wondered if you see an option in the future for eligible survivors to have a direct housing allotment that they could use as a down payment on a house, tiny house, or mobile home, rather than stay in a FEMA supported house for a period of time. In some of the situations I've seen, it would be less expensive and more empowering for survivors in the community.
That's actually a great question, and some of the feedback we actually are looking for in the listening session. I know that some ideas have come around partnering with Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae on potentially, mortgages for down payments. So some of those other great ideas on how we reimagine housing, which would obviously require legislative change, but those are certainly some of the things we're looking for in a listening session, and would be happy to hear more about that idea or any other ideas that you all have around housing.
Great, thank you. And similar questions from other participants. Are recipients of housing assistance, i.e. disaster survivors, going to be included in the focus groups or surveys, etc.?
Yes, so we have a team that does survivor engagement already, who do surveys for survivors who are part of direct housing missions. We are currently looking at what questions they ask in those surveys and identifying recent disasters with direct housing missions and formulating questions that we would not be repeating, but would actually get some of their thoughts and ideas around what would help them most in their recovery as it relates to housing. And so we will be conducting focus groups with survivors around this initiative as well.
Great, thank you. And will states be able to administer their own housing mission in the future?
So that's certainly a great question, and one that definitely interested in. We heard that same feedback from our initial NEMA listening session. Right now, under the DRRA provision, that pilot has expired, so we currently do not have authority for the states to administer direct housing, but it is something we are definitely looking at how we would be able to do that in the future in a way that allows the state to actually administer it with the help of locals and not just having to implement FEMA's direct housing program in all the ways that FEMA would do it, which makes it extremely complicated for a state to administer on their own. So I think some great ideas have come out of that, which would require legislation, some being similar to a block grant such as CDBG-DR, and other ideas around state-led. So definitely interested in upcoming listening sessions to hear your thoughts around what you think a state-led housing mission might look like.
Great. And one more question right now, and that is any consideration or anyone looking into funding communal housing?
So that's a great idea as well. You know, I think we certainly need to look at other options there. We currently look at, you know, MLRP under housing right now, which tends to not be as successful as we would like. So certainly a good idea there around communal housing, and would love to hear more of the thought behind that and how that might work in an upcoming listening session. So I think these are all great thought-provoking ideas, which would be great to have those of you on here to kind of build those out a little more in preparation for an upcoming listening session. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts behind some of those ideas.
Yes, agreed. Lots of great ideas to then put thought to paper and be able to execute on. Thank you. I don't see any other questions at this moment. So we will just go ahead, and I'll turn it over to Emily to introduce our next speaker. Thanks, Tracy.
Great, thank you both. I'd now like to turn it over to John Carlton, the Acting Deputy Division Director of the IA Division, for closing remarks. John, over to you.
Hi, great. Thank you very much, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the presenters for providing the information during today's seminar, and also thank Emily and Jennifer for their hosting and facilitating this meeting. What we'd also are going to be presenting is we have funding available, and we provided resources and time for 2 additional seminars in the future, one beginning in May and one again in July. At this time, I'd also like to thank the participants. You know, from what I understand, we've had close to about 400 people register for these seminars, and this is a great opportunity to participate and learn and experience some of the latest information that's happening in individual assistance. I also want to express that if you have any additional topics for the future, please let us know. We'd love to be able to improve the way we serve you in disasters. So please let us know of any additional topics you would like us to cover. And I'd also like to thank the participants for taking the time to join us today. And we look forward to seeing you again in May. So thanks again.
Thanks, John. Appreciate those closing remarks, and just wanted to reiterate what John just said. We welcome any feedback, questions, or content for the upcoming May and July symposium sessions, and that you can contact us at that long email address, which is the Office of Regional Field Coordination's address here at FEMA, and we will be able to capture those ideas and topics for our upcoming symposiums. I know that we have about 25 minutes left, and I just wanted to see if Tracy was still on, that there was one more comment that was made about plans to address the lack of accessible housing. So if we are unable to respond to that now, we'll definitely respond to that in our reporting and in future events and in the listening sessions. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your participation today. And all the symposiums will be posted on FEMA.gov, and all participants will receive an email with that link for those once they are posted. So for the January session and the March session, we will be posting those soon. Again, thank you all for participating, and enjoy your evening.